Hi, everyone. This is Jess, Jahnavi, and Ben. We are presenting on Eastern healing and the history of healing, basically in the East. So I'm going to go over the school of thought and a little bit about the origins and contributions. So in the East, psychotherapy can be seen as ways of life. It's very different from how it is perceived in the West. Examples are Vedanta, yoga, Buddhist, and Tao philosophies. They resemble psychotherapy and not religion, as it is understood more in the West. For example, in India, writings about psychology can be seen through literature. For example, the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata war happened in 3136 BCE. Some people say that this is a symbolic war, but it's the longest epic poem in the world with 2,736 characters and over 100,000 verses divided in 18 books. So this is an example of how a lot of people say that each character or each person can be found through the Mahabharata. You can find your own self, your own personality, your actions, behaviors, and the outcomes through this epic. Eastern way of life and Western psychotherapy are similar in their aims of bringing about changes in consciousness, how people feel about their existence, and their relations to others and the world. As a disclaimer, I would not use the word ism because I strongly believe that the Eastern philosophy has been valuing insight orientation. So it's insight oriented for a very long time. There's a saying which is a very important value in the Bhagavad Gita, which I'll speak about shortly. It means parivartan sansar ka niyam hai, which means change is the law of nature. Change is the only constant. So it believes in bringing changes, and religion, the word religion in Sanskrit translates as dharma. Dharma is duty. Actually, the meaning of dharma is duty, but it's used as a translation of religion, which is actually very different. And this is one example of how lots of things get lost in translation. So the way we perceive religion is actually duty and not revelations and things that you have to follow. And therefore, for a long period of time, if you look at the Indian history, Nalanda University from 5th century BCE in Bihar is one example of such insight orientation. It was one of the biggest universities, one of the first in the world, had one of the biggest libraries. The university word comes from a universe, so it offered more than 100 courses which each student had to take. There were students from across the world, and it was home to 10,000 students and 2,000 teachers. It was Center for Research and Innovation. It was destroyed, unfortunately, completely. It was put onto fire by Turkish armies led by Bakhtiyar Khilji, and it's considered to be one of the greatest losses to the world's knowledge. The beauty of this place, though, was that it taught a lot of Buddhist philosophies as well within the university. And so, like the West, science and religion have been in conflict. It has not been the same in the East. They have been very well integrated, and scientists were celebrated in the East for years, for centuries. The good thing that British did was they found the ruins of Nalanda. Otherwise we wouldn't have known about it. Their archaeologists found that in the 19th century. So the school of thought in the East, the major Eastern schools is Hindu philosophy, Lao Tzu, Confucius, and Buddhist philosophy. Okay. I'm going to speak more about Hindu philosophy and then touch up very briefly on the other schools. So the major text in Hindu philosophy includes the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita means Song of the Soul. I think it's a very beautiful demonstration of what psychotherapy is, because it's a conversation between Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna is a prince who has to fight a war against his own family, including his own teacher on the other side, because that side of the family disrespected his wife, who was, so basically it was a disrespect of a woman. They did a lot of wrong things. They were unjust. They took away the kingdom unfairly, and all of those things were still tolerable. But when they disrespected a woman, that's when the war of Mahabharata happened. And so the Bhagavad Gita is one chapter in Mahabharata, which is a conversation between Krishna and Arjun. And it's not an advice, or it's not a God telling him to do what he's supposed to do. It's a conversation where Krishna is exploring what Arjun feels about his about what's going to happen, and why is he worried about the war? Why is he contemplating not wanting to go fight the war? And so a lot of those fears and anxieties are walked through. One beautiful shloka from the Gita is Karmanyevadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phale heturbu mate sangostva karmani, which I think is very beautiful for anxiety. It speaks about so Krishna is telling Arjun that the only thing that's in your hand, Krishna is Lord Krishna, the only thing that's in your hand is your action, not the rewards. So when you think about the rewards, that's when you feel fear and anxiety and worry about the future. But when you focus on what you are supposed to do, your actions, that's when your fear disappears. So let not inaction be your motivation, and just focus on what's in your hands. And over the right side is like a classic picture of the Bhagavad Gita. So this symbolically means there are 5 horses over here. You can only see 4, but there are 5, where Krishna is the person who's the person writing. I don't know what do you call that, the person who has the chariot, but it means control over senses. So this symbolically means that the Gita is about learning to control your own sense of self. I find a lot of parallels in Gita which are related to Western psychology. Like sattva, rajas, tamas are 3 states. Sattva is like going towards knowledge. It has a lot of implications on someone who wants to progress and go ahead. Rajas and tamas. Rajas is in the middle, and tamas is the person who is like the id. So I mean, I should have written it super ego, and id. Similarly, atma and paramatma. Atma is your soul, paramatma is the divine soul. This is very, very similar. No, I should say personal unconscious and collective unconscious of Carl Jung is very similar to this part, which I think Ben is going to speak more about. Carl Jung was in India for 3 months. So I think a lot of beautiful concepts that come out of the Hindu philosophy are in this. Vedas are also popular. I think Ayurveda is very popular and well known in America. And continuing more about, the Bhagavad Gita also has, each chapter is called yoga. Yoga means union. Basically, it's a union of the mind and the body, mind and the soul. It's a union of the universe and the self. And so most of psychology, I would say, or philosophy that came through psychology came through scriptural texts, poetries, and literature. So Bhagavad Gita is also written in the form of poetry. Everything is rhyming and within 2 verses. And not just Gita, but then going on from Kabir to Narsi Mehta, he wrote a song called Vaishnav Jan. He speaks about compassion and virtues that you should have to be able to help other people. Sahir Ludhianvi, who wrote about Sansar Se Bhage Phirte Ho, which is a song which speaks about karma yoga, which is that living in this world and doing your duties and still being able to go beyond your desires, to be able to transcend, is karma yoga. Okay, so let's go on to Lao Tzu, who was, I mean, again, a very, very beautiful philosophy. People say that a lot of things that he said have been lost in translation and have not been able to, we're unable to translate it, because so many things that he spoke about are actually not available in the English vocabulary. I'm not going to go over this in a lot of detail because of time, but I'm happy to answer questions after this. I still kept all the things on the slides. He spoke about, so on the right side, these are the instruction for life, translated probably or written by Dalai Lama, inspired from Lao Tzu. He spoke about, I'm going to emphasize on spending some time alone every day, because I was also thinking of how people just tend to say that collectivistic cultures means everything is supposed to be done in collective. But the spiritual idea is to do it by yourself. How you get there is collective, but in the end, you are on your own. And you have to be there on your own, and solitude is different from loneliness. So that's one of the emphasis of Lao Tzu. The Buddhist philosophy, very, very well known. I know people know about the Noble Truth, so I'm not going to go over that. Buddha was born in India, and then obviously at that point, Hindu philosophy, now I'd call it Hinduism because it had become a religion. And that had so much corruption that he decided to move away from that. Although, on the right-hand side, you can see a very beautiful novel called Yashodhara. Yashodhara was Gautam Buddha's wife, and This novel is more a feminist perspective translated from Telugu, and it's about Yashodhara. So when Gautam Buddha just decides to get up and leave his palace, the privileged man, what happens to his wife and what's her perspective? Her baby is 9 day old and she has no idea, and he never returns. So I think the just to emphasize that the East has focused so much always on literature, and my professor of literature used to always say that if you want to truly understand the history, read literature, don't read history, because history was written from the perspective of the privileged. So the kings would pay historians to write history, so obviously it was written from the king's perspective, but literature was written from people's perspective. Anybody could own literature. Yeah, again, Buddhist philosophy, it spread from India to East. It was the Indian ruler Ashoka very, very strongly contributed to Buddhism spending, and then it spread across a lot of other places through that. Yes, and the last one was Confucius. He was a very famous sage. Unfortunately, when he was alive, his philosophies were rejected for 20 centuries. However, he did believe that morality will come with good leadership and education. And so he believed that give people the opportunity for good modeling to be able to learn and grow rather than just penalizing them. Yeah, and then there are some ethical teachings which I've just put on the slide. I don't have time to go over it, but I'll be happy to answer questions if people have that. I'll pass it on to Ben. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. This is Origins, also a video for people to watch. It's 10 minutes by itself, so you can watch it at your own pace.
So obviously there's been an enormous transformation in the aspects of Eastern philosophy that were talked about in the East and then got sort of filtered through the Western lens as they traveled further to the West. And that was a very long, gradual process. It could be an entire presentation on its own, so I'm only going to lightly touch on it here, but I want to give you a general idea of how that process happened. So some of the first contact that West had with Eastern philosophy and religion was from Alexander the Great's invasion of Asia. He invaded all the way into India. And additionally, ancient Rome traded with the Han Dynasty. But this wasn't really a comprehensive set of information that they were working with about the belief structure and the principles of these philosophies. They were mostly interested in these things as fantastical rumors and stories. They didn't really understand them as philosophies yet, the average person. And that's largely how it stayed until the Mongolian invasion in the 13th century. And what this did is, because of the nature of war, they were forced to establish diplomatic contact with Western powers who were trying to negotiate peace with them. And so the Western powers, especially the aristocracy of the West, gained more regular contact with the East and started to learn a little bit more about their philosophies. This kind of largely stayed at the level of insight the average Westerner had until the Age of Discovery that went from the 15th to the 17th century, where now Europeans are traveling around the world, and this information is starting to spread a bit more openly and freely. It's at this point where maybe the average person doesn't really understand what something like Hinduism is, but maybe they've at least heard of the word, right? And then the colonial period after that, which is ongoing today, of course, sort of completed the travel of Eastern philosophy to the West, as people from the West appropriated and claimed the aspects of Eastern philosophy that were useful to them and integrated it into their own belief structures and their own daily lives. So in terms of the modern transfer of all of this, I would say it started with Helena Blavatsky, who was and is a very controversial and problematic figure. She was this Russian noble who claimed to travel to India to study with these masters of ancient wisdom that she said could occupy different planes of existence, and she would converse with them as they switched between the astral and physical plane. Many historians believe that some or all of this was made up, obviously. When she came back from those studies, she founded Theosophy, or the Theosophetical Foundation. And basically, this was a combination of Buddhism, Hinduism, and Western occultism. And really, this is an enormous bastardization of Eastern philosophy. There's bits and pieces of Eastern philosophy in there, but it is integrated into very, very new systems of belief and setting. And it's also given a more spiritual tone. For what it's worth, she was the first US citizen to formally convert to Buddhism, but frankly, I think she converted to Buddhism in the same way that a lot of college kids in the US say they convert to Buddhism. And then from there, she toured the Western Hemisphere, lecturing and performing miracles, although a lot of those miracles have been officially debunked. But it is safe to say that she profoundly shaped the rest of the New Age movement in the West. And it's fair to say that Neo and New Age spirituality, as well as to some extent, I think, the average Westerner's understanding of Eastern philosophy would look profoundly different without her. So Swami Vivekananda, sorry, he was an Indian philosopher, author, and monk. He was also an important figure in the Indian nationalism movement. He was enormously important in bringing Eastern philosophy, especially Hindu philosophy, to the West. And this was initially done in the Chicago 1893 World Fair. They had this thing called the Parliament of Religions, and the idea was that they would get all these influential speakers from various faiths, and then all the goers of the World Fair could go to this Parliament of Religions and become educated on the various faiths of the world. And so this is sort of where he got his quote unquote start in America. But his influence quickly grew after that. He spent a lot of the rest of his life lecturing in the US and the UK and Europe, educating Hinduism, educating about certain aspects of Hindu philosophies to Western individuals. I would say, of all these people that I'm going to talk about, I think you could make a fair argument to say that he's one of the most influential people in bringing this to the West, and that he played a massive part in legitimizing Hinduism as a accepted religion in the West. So then Carl Jung, he needs no introduction. He was a Swedish psychologist, and he had two big contributions to this process. So what he did is he went to India for 3 months, and he really blatantly took a lot of these ideas from, especially, from Hindu and Buddhist philosophy, and integrated them into his own psychological theories, somewhat claiming that they were his own. But the two big contributions that he had was, one, popularizing the idea of collective unconsciousness to the West, and then also relating those philosophies to these psychological approaches, and through that introducing Hindu and Buddhist philosophy to, I guess, joining that to the idea of wellness and medicine through psychological medicine in the West. So then there was the New Age movement of the 1960s and 70s, and here we see an enormous explosion of cultural and spiritual curiosity and exploration in the West. So people are at this point getting very interested in Eastern spirituality and alternative spirituality. And these philosophies become surface level major components of counterculture at that time that persist today. So part of the reason that these philosophies were becoming so popular with the masses, I would say there's two broad reasons in addition to a lot of minor reasons. But the two big ones were very popular celebrities, especially musicians, were getting involved in certain aspects of Eastern spirituality, like the Beatles, the Beach Boys, Mick Jagger, right? These are, the A-list celebrities of their time, and they're very visibly studying and to some extent practicing some of these philosophies. The other one was the enormous proliferation of psychedelic drugs in the 1960s. So these drugs, one of the things that users report is this feeling of connectedness and oneness with the universe. And so this is an idea that's very compatible with many parts of various Eastern philosophies. And so in some ways, it was a natural jumping point from the experiences that these psychedelic drug users were having to then connect those to a pre-established spirituality. And then Alan Watts was an interesting figure during this New Age movement. He was a British philosopher, learned about Zen Buddhism while he was growing up in the UK. He was a massive countercultural figurehead in the 50s and 60s, and he is enormously influential in helping popularize Buddhism, especially Zen Buddhism, Taoism, and Hindu philosophy ideas, and introducing those to the counterculture at the time, most notably the hippie movement. And one of the ways that he did this was he was a masterful orator. I heavily suggest looking up an audio recording of some of his lectures sometimes. He is an amazing speaker, and he was one of the first ones to successfully utilize television and radio to spread his messages. And that's still being done today. YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, they are still filled with just sound clips of this guy talking about these various philosophies. He was also influential in arguing for Buddhism as a form of psychotherapy in and of itself. And his influence can really still be felt today. Modern mindfulness probably would not look the same without him. His ideas really helped develop some of positive psychology. And for being someone who was not in any way, shape, or form a psychologist, he actually contributed significantly to many psychological ideas. And then lastly, we have Ram Dass. So he was born Richard Alpert. He was a pioneer in psychedelic drug research at Harvard in the 1960s. He's best known for his Good Friday experiment, if you want to learn more about his work. So in 1967, he's fired from Harvard, allegedly for providing psilocybin to some of his students. And he goes to India with a friend. Eventually, he and his friend separate ways, and he starts following around this Hindu monk. He lives with him for about 6 months, just learning more about Eastern philosophy before then spending the next roughly 4 years at a Hindu monastery, where he's studying under a guru, becoming a teacher in his own right of a lot of these philosophies. And then when he comes back to America in 1971, he publishes Be Here Now, which is a really fantastic, very short read, but it becomes essentially like the Bible of that counterculture movement at the time. And it has a huge impact on New Age spirituality in the US, and it really helps make Eastern philosophy accessible and practical to Western audiences. And so as part of that, he goes around teaching people and help popularizing things like yoga, things like mindfulness, and he did this until his death just a few years ago in 2019. So after that, right, the rest, as they say, is history. You can still find a lot of influencers and stuff like that, even celebrities like Russell Brand talking about Eastern philosophy, but it has really become extremely heavily corrupted since then. Not that it wasn't really always corrupted, but it has become even more so in recent time. And what's been happening is these influencers are really just picking out individual ideas that suit the arguments that they're trying to present. And as a result, Eastern philosophy is really often misrepresented and losing a lot of its original identity now in the West.
All right, I'm gonna end us in this presentation by talking about how Buddhism and Hinduism and all of Eastern healing kind of now relates to modern day psychology. So as Jahnavi and Ben have pointed out, just the connection from yoga and meditation and how that comes from Buddhism and how that then relates to mindfulness and yoga from Hinduism. So mindfulness, like I just said, it comes from meditation. And I think one of the common, I would say, like, criticisms or negative stereotypes that people hold of mindfulness is that there is the spirituality component, and mindfulness can really be whatever you want it to be. It can have that spirituality component to it. It can be a form of meditation, which is used to practice which can be used to practice Buddhism. At the same time, mindfulness doesn't have to be that. Mindfulness can be a lot of different things. So I think that's one of, at least something I've noticed in my practice is when you mention mindfulness, I've had people immediately say that's against my religion to practice mindfulness. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of differences and it can be a lot of different things. And we'll talk about those in a minute here. But mindfulness first appeared in modern psychology in regards to behavioral and holistic medicine and those areas. In the 90s is when it really started rising exponentially and being used in different psychological practices and psychotherapy. It really jumped. Now there's a lot of research out there about the uses of mindfulness in psychotherapy and psychology. Most commonly, it's integrated in interventions for depression, anxiety. There's a lot of research evidence out there that proves that mindfulness is very helpful in treating those forms of therapy, and in some cases can be even more helpful than using medications. And mindfulness can be a lot of different things, as I just mentioned. It's most commonly used with meditation or breathing exercises, body scanning, progressive muscle relaxation, where you're tightening your muscles and then relaxing them, creating that physical sensation of relaxation. And it can also be used as visualization and guided imagery, where someone is walking you through visualizing something that's going on for you. As I mentioned, then mindfulness is integrated within a lot of different psychotherapies. You can integrate it in pretty much any form of psychotherapy, but there is actually a psychotherapy that it includes in its name, which is mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So that's where you're using mindfulness meditation to help someone become more aware and pay attention to their thoughts and feelings without placing judgment on them. So I do this a lot in my practice of CBT, which is my modality of therapy that I focus when. So kind of the way I would explain it to a client or anyone really is when you're looking at your CBT triangle, thoughts and behaviors are kind of what are influencing emotions, but it's bi-directional. It can, either one of them is kind of influencing that. But when you're talking about thoughts specifically, in order to stop thoughts from happening, CBT and cognitive therapy, you have to be able to stop those thoughts and change them in order to have different emotional outcomes, and distress tolerance comes into play. So the way that mindfulness is integrated into this practice, mindfulness is all about bringing awareness to those thoughts. And you have to be able to stop those thoughts and be able to change them to make them more positive. So we encourage mindfulness as is a way to become aware and to stop those thoughts. So that's how it is integrated into cognitive therapy as well as cognitive behavior therapy. It's kind of a technique to know when those thoughts are coming up, those unhelpful thoughts or whatever they might be. And then another connection to modern psychology is in sports psychology, which is also a newer field. But some of the core principles of sports psychology is teaching mental skills. And one of the core mental skills is mental imagery. And that is a form of guided imagery or visualization. So mindfulness is being integrated a lot into sports psychology as well. So then kind of the differences between mindfulness and meditation. So as I mentioned, mindfulness comes from meditation, but there are some differences between the two of them. There are a lot of similarities. Yeah, meditation is a form of a breathing exercise, which is commonly used in mindfulness. And there is mindful meditation, which again is that breathing exercise used to bring thoughts into awareness. But the goal of mindfulness is to bring that awareness to your thoughts. The here and now has kind of been alluded to in that book by Baba Ram Dass, is that here and now, being focused on what's going on for you presently, being watchful of those thoughts that are coming in without placing judgment on those thoughts. And in order to be aware and to watch for your thoughts, you kind of have to be in this active state of mind. Whereas in meditation, it's about concentration. You're directing your attention to a specific focus that's going on, and you're kind of letting your thoughts go. So I think people often think that meditation is what we're doing in mindfulness, which it could be in some cases, but a lot of times mindfulness it's in that active frame. It's being watchful of those thoughts instead of just focusing on a specific thing. You might be focusing on your breath, but you might also be looking for thoughts and things like that. So meditation is thought to kind of be more in that mindless state of being. And then lastly, connections to daily life. As I mentioned, mindfulness is used in psychotherapy, but mindfulness is just often used in everyday practice. We might be doing it without even knowing we're doing it too. Also, the integration into sports and then yoga as well, as I mentioned. So with sports specifically, mindfulness is integrated within performance work for sports, preparing for a race or a game, a match, whatever it might be, being able to visualize what's going on in that session, what's going on in that event, what it might look like, how it's going to go, how you want that race or that game to go. It's often used, athletes often use this. Michael Phelps is a staple who uses this in his sports practice. But as mindfulness has become more popularized, a lot more athletes are integrating it into their pregame rituals or whatever it might be in order for them to focus and be prepared for that game. So a big way to kind of sell this for athletes is that it helps with attention, it helps with focus. A lot of times we talk about sports being very mental and just having that mental skill set. Mindfulness can be really helpful for that. And then, as I mentioned, mindfulness, we do this all in, most of our day to day, especially, I talk about this with clients too. One of the easiest ways to integrate mindfulness is things that you already do. Instead of just being on your phone while you're walking, why don't you try taking a mindful walk? And that might look like observing your senses that are going on. Put your phone away. What are the noises you're hearing? What are the sights you're seeing? Smells you're smelling, those sorts of things. So it's really easy to integrate into day to day. And a lot of people do this in their day to day. Another really good one is showers or just like listening to music, all super simple ways that people can and do integrate mindfulness into their day to day. And then also there's yoga, which is a very popular form of exercise. You can find a bajillion different yoga places within Iowa City, especially. And the most common practice of yoga is hatha yoga within the Western culture. But yoga was originally a means for doing meditation. Now, like I said, in the West, especially, it's more so used for exercise, but it still can be very much integrated in meditation and focusing on that breath and used as a form of meditation and as a form of mindfulness. And yoga is kind of as Jahnavi had mentioned, the joining the body to the mind and together joining the self, the soul, or the union between the individual self and the transcendental self. So this is supposed to be like a preventative practice. So in psychotherapy, especially in counseling psychology, we're really focused on preventative medicine. So this is a prime example of preventative in a way to kind of incorporate the body, mind, and the soul and the spirit. And the father of yoga actually then defines it too as a way that which restrains the thought process and makes the mind serene. So again, just bringing peace and can be a form of reducing anxiety and depression. So that's kind of connections to daily life. And then lastly, that kind of concludes the presentation and material section. But I was going to walk us through a form of mindfulness. This is specifically a form of guided imagery. Which, as I mentioned, and it can be used a lot. Guided imagery is used a lot with athletes and also just with everyday therapy clients, or just in general, it can be really helpful for when you're anxious, when you need help falling asleep. Really, anytime you can kind of do this. Leaves on a Stream, though, I found to be very popular with a lot of my athletes and other students. So I thought I would go through this script for us today. So I invite you to kind of find a comfortable position in your chair with your feet flat on the floor, your arms and legs uncrossed, and your hands resting in your lap. You can let your eyes close or find a position to kind of focus on. Take a couple of gentle breaths in and out. Notice the sound and feel of your own breath as you breathe in and out. Now I'd like you to imagine that you're standing by the bank of a gently flowing stream, watching the water flow. Imagine feeling the ground beneath you, the sounds of the water flowing past, and the way the stream looks as you watch it. Imagine that there are leaves from trees of all different shapes, sizes, and colors floating past on the stream, and you're just watching them float on the stream. This is all you need to do for the time being. Start to become aware of your thoughts, feelings, or sensations. Each time you notice a thought, feeling, or sensation, imagine placing it on a leaf and letting it flow down the stream. Do this regardless of whether the thoughts, feelings, or sensations are positive or negative, pleasurable or painful. Even if they're the most wonderful thoughts, place them on a leaf and let them float by. If your thoughts stop, just watch the stream. Sooner or later, your thoughts should start up again. Allow the stream to flow at its own rate. Notice any urges to speed up or slow down the stream. And let these be on leaves as well. Let the stream flow how it will. If you have thoughts, feelings, or sensations about doing this exercise, place them on leaves as well. If a leaf gets stuck or won't go away, let it hang around. For a little while, all you're doing is observing this experience. There's no need to force the leaf down the stream. If you find yourself getting caught up with a thought or feeling, such as boredom or impatience, simply acknowledge it. Say to yourself, here's a feeling of boredom, or here's a feeling of impatience. Then place those words on a leaf and let them float on by. You're just observing each experience and placing it on the leaf. It's normal and natural to lose track of this exercise, and it'll keep happening. When you notice yourself losing track, just bring yourself back to watching the leaves on the stream. Notice the stream and place any thoughts, feelings, or sensations on the leaves and let them gently flow down the stream. Finally, allow the image of the stream to dissolve and slowly bring your attention back to sitting in the chair in this room. You can gently open your eyes and notice what you can see, notice what you can hear, and push your feet into the floor and stretch if you need to. And welcome back to the space. So thank you for following along on that mindfulness script. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's just one way which you can incorporate mindfulness into everyday psychology or into your just day-to-day. Thanks for listening.